Hello everybody and welcome to what is a very off-topic sort of video for me to be making for this channel. I know I mostly focus on gaming and game design style content, but I mean One Piece has just been so crazy as of late that I really want to talk about it with you guys just because it's fun to speculate and talk about it with other people, comparing theories and all that jazz. So I'm just eager to kind of get all these words out of my brain about the latest chapters. So, on that note, before we get started, the reason why I've got Pepe Sylvia up right now is because this is your spoiler warning. If you have, for some reason, clicked on this video and you are a fan of One Piece and you have not yet read the latest chapter as of the time of this recording, which is chapter 1138. That is chapter 1138. If you have not read chapter 1138 before watching this video, I highly recommend that you pause it, go do your homework, catch up with One Piece, and then we can all return to the video all on the same page. Okay, everybody on the same page? We all caught up now? Okay, well then without much further ado, let us talk about the mural. So this is quite possibly one of the most insane lore dumps in all of One Piece. Like, I've already been talking about this with my friends for hours. Just talking about the basic information that has been portrayed here, and there's even more to talk about it if you start going into like alternate translations and everything. So just to once again make sure everybody is on the same page, uh what is happening here is the Straw Hats are just kind of chilling on Elbaf, and so there is simultaneously a big story being read by Robin over in the library with Saul and everybody. And then Frankie has been wandering off with another giant to visit this, ancient cultural historical site where allegedly a bunch of children made some random drawings that are very clearly related to the stories being told, with the idea being that these stories up here are basically like they're sort of like foundational myths for the Elbaf people that have led to, ironically enough, a ton of different interpretations. It's so amazing how this is playing out, because I've seen so many different people just talking with my friends or discussing it with online and whatnot, where like so many people have different interpretations for this already, and this has only been out for a few days. It's crazy. But yeah, so I guess there's a lot to dig in. I mean, we've basically got three major sections to talk about. We have the stories up top. We have the entire like cityscape on the right side of the mural, and then we have this sort of war scene on the left side of the mural. So let's take things one at a time, and let's start with the story at the top, because I mean we're going top to bottom, and then of course this is manga, so right to left. So let's just kind of start where your eye would naturally begin. So we have basically the myth that is being read is split up into three parts, where it seemingly represents three vastly different states that the world has existed in throughout the One Piece history. And it is explicitly mentioned that the third world is meant to be like the modern day, and the first and second world are ancient history. And the first obvious takeaway, even before we read any of the text, is likely that the second world refers to the Void Century. That is the period of time from around 8 to 900 years ago that is just a blank spot in history. And then the first world either refers to just any amount of time before the Void Century. So, like, the second world might have only existed for 100 years, or it's possible that the second world was ended by the Void Century and could have existed for some amount of time before the Void Century, but the first world represents an even more ancient history that was, at some point, like, upheaved or erased or something, just like what the second world is for the third world. So, like, we're going, like, double Void Century or something over here. So yeah, so in regards to the actual text itself, let's actually like read a single word of dialogue. So we've got, within the earth there was fire. Mankind succumbed to greed and touched the forbidden sun. The enslaved prayed, and the sun god appeared. The earth god raged, and with its serpent of hellfire, shrouded the world in death and darkness, and they will never meet. Okay, already a lot to talk about. So we can kind of already draw some immediate connections between the statements in the first chapter and what's happening on the right, which again immediately seems to imply that this side of the mural is representing the first world. This side of the mural represents the second world, and then again, the third world would be the modern day. Keeping in mind that again, this mural was drawn during the Void Century, so this whole nonsense over here would be considered the modern day of the time. So of course they wouldn't represent, the actual current modern day in the world of One Piece. So, right off the bat, within the earth there was fire. Well, if we look down here, this whole conveyor belt system here. So let's just sort of break down what we're even looking at because it's kind of crazy. We've got a seemingly like modern day style cityscape. I mean, obviously it's very cartoony and loosey goosey, but like if you asked a child to draw like New York City, this is probably the kind of thing they would draw. Like a bunch of random skyscrapers billowing out smoke, so implying pollution, climate change, that sort of thing. There's been a lot of like allusions to that sort of stuff throughout One Piece. And then we have this sort of long conveyor belt where it seems like people are coming out of the city, are descending into the earth, with the bottom of the mural all across, by the way, being fire, and then they seemingly come out of there carrying these sort of weird spiky ball things, and then they seem to pass it across this boat. I don't know if that's relevant, but then they switch over onto this conveyor belt where they then deposit it into this boat, and then that, I guess, goes into the city, and that presumably provides some sort of loop. So the clear implication here, especially based off of the phrasing of the first world's description, is that the most ancient version of the One Piece planet, at least that is in known history, is seemingly the advanced civilization that could very well be like a sort of at least somewhat similar version of like modern day Earth, where they have some sort of energy system that requires them to use a bunch of slaves, as is implied by the text up here, to dive into the earth, like in some sort of mine, or literally just going to like the planet's core, perhaps to get like fire. So maybe it's like geothermal energy or something. And then they recover that energy and then just pump it into the city, which then pollutes the earth. So it's also it's interesting how they describe within the earth there was fire. So like I said, it could be referring to geothermal energy. Maybe it's referring to something else. There are some weird details about this because, like, for example, it almost looks like these guys that are descending into the earth, they almost look like they have like halos or something. It's kind of hard to tell, honestly. But it's interesting how it looks. Like, you see what I mean, right? It's clearly just like a blob, but the way it's positioned in the shape seems to imply that it's some kind of halo, or because like almost everything in this mural seems to have some kind of symbolism. But what's weird is that the people don't have these halos before they get on the elevator. It's only when they get on the elevator do they gain these halos, and then when they descend into the earth, they lose the halo, and then they come back out with energy. And I have absolutely no goddamn idea what that means, but it's so weird because it feels like a very purposeful detail. Like, why else would these tiny little circles be here? Like, I can't really think of another explanation for it beyond it just being some kind of halo or something that would be floating above their heads. That again, they seem to be giving up. So I'm wondering if it's not just as simple as recovering the resources, because it does say like within the earth there was fire, and like if that's all that mattered, that there was some fire that could be reclaimed, surely they could have used some kind of like automated process and not had to have resorted to slavery. So what I'm wondering is if this halo is implying that perhaps the human element or whatever species this is was required in order to harvest this energy, and that these people that were forced, that were enslaved to harvest it, to mine it from the Earth's core, were in turn giving up something in order to power it. Like maybe that's why it was a limitless energy, which that in turn leads me to believe that it could be related to Haki in some way. Like perhaps this was like the earliest discovery of Haki, and they had figured out some method to like send people who were able to use Haki in some way into the Earth's core, and then they could infuse that Haki into some, stone or some element deep in the earth that then was able to store that Haki. Because we know that you can store Haki in objects, because we have there's multiple instances. For example, Emmet, the giant robot, who I believe is depicted right here, he rather famously used in Egghead Island. Again, we're going to be talking about Race of One Piece stuff, so. But yeah, in Egghead, he fended off the Gorosei with a knot infused with Haki that has been kept secure for like 800 years, and so that Joy Boy could basically use a Conqueror's Burst to fend off the Gorosei through time, through that knot. So we know there are means of storing Haki, not to mention that this also would tie into the theory. It's not confirmed yet, but it would make a lot of sense with all the information we know if the reason why the poneglyphs are indestructible is because of Haki. So like the idea would be that it's essentially the poneglyphs are just normal rocks, and they were carved into them like normal, and then once they were carved, the way they were made indestructible was through Haki infusion. And so that would explain why the stones are for some reason indestructible, despite the fact that they have things carved into them. And it would also further explain why people like Roger are able to hear the voice of all things from these Haki infused poneglyphs. I know this is kind of off topic, but I do think this is an interesting theory worth sort of considering, because that would explain, because the Haki would presumably still carry some amount of like the soul or the essence of the people who infused it. I mean, after all, people often recognize other people by their Haki. I believe there's been a number of times where people recognize Shanks, for example, by the fact that he was emanating Conqueror's Haki before he was like within their eyesight. The Admiral Green Bull recognized Shanks from miles away using the Haki. People recognize Joy Boy through the Haki. So Haki clearly carries some element of the person in itself when you infuse it into an object. Which, again, tying it all back to the whole slavery thing in the First World, that could explain why the slaves are needed and why the slaves were so oppressed and in need of revolution. Okay, so... Cool. That was a lot, and again, there's still so much to talk about here. So they touch the Forbidden Sun. I assume that Forbidden Sun is just kind of, it's the name of the Mother Flame. This is presumably referring to the Mother Flame, which again, the Mother Flame could refer to like Mother Earth and the flame that is at the core of the Earth. So that would make sense, and then that could easily be described as a Forbidden Sun. Then we have the enslaved prayed and the sun god appeared. Now, this obviously would be referring to Nika, who is the god of liberation. So we all know everything about Nika, or at least the general idea of Nika at this point in the story. Luffy, in fact, has the Nika fruit, so he is now essentially the embodiment of the god of liberation. And it seems that the first instance of Nika ever appearing is in the first world to free the slaves from this cycle of oppression, gathering the Mother Flame for these ancient polluting cities that were probably destroying the earth anyways. Now, the question here to me is this Nika that we're talking about in this story a literal person or an idea? Because there's been some back and forth on the theory that Nika is originally simply a fictional character. He might have been worshipped as a god or simply been viewed as like a comic character. Like I know there's been a few lore channels that have gone with that sort of theory. And so that's the thing is that did the enslaved become free because like Nika literally descended from the heavens and freed them by punching whatever big bad was around, or did they become free because they came up with the symbol of the sun god, and as opposed to there being like a literal sun god that helped them, they were able to rally under this idea of a sun god who was a god of liberation, and then were in turn able to free themselves through some kind of mass uprising. That is interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the second world. Then we have the earth god raged, and with its serpent of hellfire shrouded the world in death and darkness, and they will never meet. Okay, so again, we now have the Earth God. This whole sequence is going to be mentioning a lot of gods, which I think is fascinating. And in particular, this mentions the Serpent of Hellfire. Now, I'm curious about this because there's one theory in particular that the phrasing of the Serpent of Hellfire brings to mind, because we've been so Dorian Broggy back in Little Garden, if you remember all the way back then, when they used their attack that destroyed the goldfish, they told the Straw Hats that their attack is so powerful that there's only one thing that it couldn't destroy, and that was the great red serpent soaked in blood. And that is presumably because Elbaf is based very heavily in Norse mythology. This is likely referring to Jormungandr, the world serpent that encircles the globe. And in turn, they're talking about a serpent that was soaked in blood. So it would be a red serpent that encircles the globe. And it's also something that can resist the power of these two giants using their most powerful attacks against each other. And that, to me, only describes one thing, and that is, of course, the red line. The giant red line that encircles the entire One Piece Earth. So, what I am wondering here is kind of extending on what I was saying earlier about, are these gods literal or figurative? I'm wondering if this is, referring to some sort of figurative event that it's not necessarily that any one person was the earth god that got rage, but I'm wondering if maybe there was some kind of incident or event that occurred that caused the creation of the Serpent of Hellfire, which again, that would be a gigantic red serpent, because Hellfire, last I checked, was red, that shrouded the world in death and darkness, and then they will never meet. So what if this is in fact referring to the red line itself, and the idea here is that, again, we have to keep in mind a lot of this is, we're talking about mythology here. We're not talking about literal history. So I'm thinking that if we are trying to interpret this as to what might have actually happened and how it might have been mythologized, I think the sun god is a fictional symbol. It is a symbol of liberation. It is a symbol that the enslaved used in order to escape and break their chains, for example. And then the earth god could simply represent the people who opposed them and tried to retaliate. And, clearly we're talking about a very advanced civilization here. So they were clearly dealing with some kind of super technology. And we're talking about shrouding the world in death and darkness, and this could be like as some sort of like okay, we're gonna lose, we need to retaliate, we need to screw these people over because how dare these slaves rise up against us. They could have created the red line, maybe even unintentionally. I'm wondering if that's even possible, if like some kind of like super terraforming weapon that they've been using to like dig these massive tunnels in the earth resulted in the creation of the Serpent of Hellfire. So like, because I could imagine if they're digging these massive tunnels into the earth, they presumably need to displace all of that earth, and that earth would be deep into the earth's core, so it could still be molten magma that could be on fire. So like the initial creation of the red line could literally have been them spewing magma across the planet, and that I could see that being a gigantic event that could be described as the Earth God raging, as like these artificial volcanoes spew out just endless tides of magma, creating the Serpent of Hellfire, the red line, that then shrouds the world in death and darkness. A volcanic eruption releases, obviously it's a very lethal encounter, but also volcanic eruptions commonly they result in ash clouds that can shroud the sun. It could literally, in opposition to this quote-unquote sun god, right, this could be them releasing like all these volcanic eruptions across the planet using their hyper advanced technology or whatever, releasing all of this magma, you know, creating the entire red line. And that could be the cataclysm that ends the first world as they knew it. And then of course the final line is, and they will never meet. And I have an idea about this that I will get to later. But yeah, so I'm wondering, or I'm thinking that the first world ended with the creation of the red line. And that I think is a very interesting way for the story to go. I think that would be really cool. And because like the red line is clearly artificial, like even discounting all of this other information, just looking at a map of the One Piece world, like let me pull one up real quick, just to have one for visual reference. Okay, here we go. So yeah, like just looking at the One Piece planet, even if we're like talking like less than like 100 chapters into the series, just learning about the nature of the world for the very first time. Are you really going to tell me that this inexplicable gigantic landmass that circles the entire globe in basically a straight line, that also seemingly is completely discolored compared to all of the other land masses because it's distinctly red? Not to mention that it's also like Nami mentions in some early chapter that parts of the red line are seemingly like, I don't want to use the word constructed because that's not how she phrased it, but like they contain separate biomes. Like there are parts of the red line that are winter islands. There are parts of the red line that are summer islands. Like it feels like the red line was almost certainly constructed, and I could see this sort of war that like with this massive like mining equipment and terraforming, all this insane energy and technology, I could see this war being what resulted in the creation of the red line. I mean, maybe it's not even part of the war, it could just be part of the sort of consequences of whatever mining technique they were using. Like maybe they just started somewhere, and like I said, they've been digging so much they started piling up in one place, and when that got too high, they just moved the pile further down the planet until it eventually circled the entire globe. There's a lot of different ways that it could maybe make sense that the red line was artificial, but I think that's where like all roads converge, is on this idea that the red line is in some way artificial. But yeah, so let's move on to the second world now, finally. So the second world, those within the void, there was breath. The forest god tamed demons, and the sun spreads the fires of war. Cool. Okay. So within the void, there was breath. That alone is an interesting statement because it could be referring to the void century, Because that is the obvious term where we have seen the word void used before on many occasions. However, again, it wouldn't, like, if this was written during the void century, why would they already refer to it as the void century, right? So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But it says within the void there was breath. So that's the thing, is that this could be tying actually into the idea that the celestial dragons are astronauts, because famously the celestial dragon outfit looks like, almost like a cartoon parody of an astronaut's outfit, with it even having to the point of having those bubble helmets that allow them to breathe like only like rich air, because they don't want to breathe the same air as the plebeians on the ground level of the planet. And over here in the mural, we have a bunch of people on a ship that are seemingly wearing fully enclosed suits. And it's also on the side that is opposing Nika and all of their subordinates. So this could almost certainly be the sort of proto-celestial dragons. And so that's the other thing, is that, so all of the ships in this mural, right? Or at least all the ships on this side of the mural, they all have the exact same style of like a classic Viking, like I think it's called like a longship or something, but it's these classic like Elbaf style ships, right? And that's the thing, is that if this mural was really drawn by children, then they would have no real conception of like fancier ships or other things, like at least nothing that they wouldn't have been shown directly. If you just told them that they were like coming in on a ship, then their only conception of what a ship is would be these Elbaf style longships. So like, for example, this ship over here I think is clearly representing Wano, but this is clearly not a Wano style ship. So I think that we again have to keep in mind that the people writing this book or drawing this mural could be working off of incomplete information and their own interpretations that we then have to uninterpretate in order to sort of decipher the reality of what they're actually trying to depict. So here we clearly have some kind of ship that is sort of, it's on a clear descent from like a higher location. It's on the side of what is very clearly like this bad person that is opposing Nika. So this could literally be astronauts on a spaceship that again is simply being reinterpreted as an Elbaf style ship. And if that's true, then that would make sense with within the void there was breath. This could literally be talking about just the idea of a spaceship. You are in the void of space, and yet you're able to breathe through the use of the advanced technology of the first world. So this could be directly confirming the idea that the celestial dragons are in fact based off of essentially ancient astronauts who may have come down from another planet, which then that also ties into this idea that the first world and the second world, they could literally be referring to different planets. Like if we actually we have this depiction of the moon up here, but we also, in the background between these two books, it looks like there's another planet here, and then there's even a third planet over here. Now if you go all the way back to Ohara, there is that one planetarium that shows the One Piece world seemingly having like 8 moons orbit it or something like that. And that could be the case, that this is simply depicting all of the random background moons that we almost never see in the real story. But it could also be depicting the idea that like this civilization could have been a straight up sci-fi interplanetary civilization, with the world that is being harvested here simply being like a world that was meant to harvest energy. And maybe that explains why they're loading the energy onto ships so that it can then be transported up into space to go to like other worlds. Like this could literally have just been like a massive interplanetary civilization that has like spaceships ferrying resources between planets. So like maybe there's like a city planet where people live, like Coruscant, that is reliant on planets like this one to produce energy or food or other resources that then all get shipped back to the main planet. So that could mean that this entire like planet could have been like enslaved, despite all of the different races and people that live on it. And so, like, this one line could be potentially confirming the idea that One Piece has secretly been a sci-fi story this whole time. Um, but okay, let's move on because we have a lot more to talk about still. The forest god tamed demons, and the sun spread the fires of war. So this phrasing, the immediate thought that comes from the whole forest god taming demons. So demons obviously very close to devils. So, and we're talking about a forest god now. So again, maybe we might not be referring to literal people because we have the earth god, we have the sun god, and I've already come up with ways that like this might not necessarily refer to a literal person that embodied that god. This could simply refer to ideas that are being represented by that god. So the forest god could be referring to the devil fruit tree, like not like a person, but just simply a tree. Maybe that tree was created artificially. Again, there's a popular theory, especially now that we have smile fruits and whatnot, that the devil fruits are in fact some kind of artificial creation by ancient humanity. So I think that the forest god taming demons, thus, you know, the clear implication being that the devil fruits are created. It could mean that the devil fruits were created naturally, maybe out of some element of the world. Maybe they were simply discovered, like the devil fruit tree was found for the first time, and they harvested all the fruit from it, and then that's why there are now devil fruits just out and about in the world. Or it could, like I said, refer to somebody like Vegapunk, some kind of ancient scientist who created devil fruits and created the devil fruit tree. And I guess that person would in turn be the forest god. But again, like they wouldn't like have any kind of like divine abilities or anything. They would just represent the sort of idea of a forest god through the creation of these devil fruits. But in the meantime, we also have the sun spreads the fires of war. So that again seems to be tying back to this idea of Nika. And now that devil fruits have been created, that means that now this could be the actual first like incarnation of Nika as a devil fruit. Now is this necessarily Joy Boy? Probably. I could see it again. That depends on sort of your interpretation of whether the second world simply refers to just the Void Century, or if the second world refers to a period of time that included the Void Century when it ended, but could have existed for potentially hundreds of years before the Void Century. So like I said, First World could be thousands of years ago. That ended when the World Red Line was created, let's say like, I don't know, like 2,000 years ago, right? Then the second world would have been created would have started after the Red Line was created, and there could have been many incarnations of Nika who spread the fires of war, with each version of Nika maybe taking some different interpretation of liberation, or maybe even fighting for a different cause, you know? One side who was oppressed and currently enslaved, gets a hold of the Nika fruit, frees themselves. Maybe they end up oppressing somebody else who then gets the Nika fruit. And so different interpretations, different people encountering the fruit. So this could represent the fruit jumping around, causing all these different wars. But again, it could also simply be referring to Joy Boy in particular as he sort of spread the fire of war to rise up against who presumably would be Emu. To go off into the second half of the second book, those of the half moon dreamed. Those of the moon dreamed. So this is again interesting. We know, based on Vegapunk's theorizing or hypothesizing, devil fruits are presumably the creations of mankind's dream. So it's possible that like once devil fruits were created, then all it took was for people to start dreaming. We have the dreams of the half moon, dreams of the moon. Once those people started to dream, that is what created basically the bevy of devil fruits that we are now dealing with in the modern era. So this could simply be further referring to just more devil fruits being created. I think that kind of makes sense. It is interesting, though, that it is split up between the half moon and the moon. And the half moon, again, pops up again in the third world. So that this ties into another theory. So talking about the will of D. So the will of D is the big thing is like, what does the D stand for? We sort of have a general idea that the D probably represents the people of Joy Boy's like army, effectively, who clearly failed, because we know Joy Boy ultimately failed in his quest. They lost, and the Void Century became the Void Century because of that. But the people who were part of this organization may have kept the D symbol as part of their name to try and like pass on their legacy. So, but the question is, what does the D actually mean? And there are two theories that I personally really, really like as interpretations of the D that don't actually require you to like create a word. Cause like some people are like, oh, it's the will of dreams, or it's the will of devils, or like trying to come up with words like that to figure out what the D stands for. But I think the D doesn't actually stand for anything. The two theories that I personally buy a lot are the first one, which I personally now think is slightly less likely, is that the D literally represents like a smile, like a classic like smiling emoticon. And especially if you look at how like Oda draws Luffy laughing, he always has this sort of super big grin with like, you know, his mouth wide open, and it's almost always shaped like this. And so this could literally be like an ancient emoticon being used to represent an entire clan, which would make sense given the fact that Nika was being embodied by a man named Joy Boy. So if that, and not to mention Nika is all about laughing and dancing and spreading joy and everything, so having it represented by a smile makes sense. But what this could be implying is the other theory, which is that the D represents a half moon, because I mean, again, if you look at what a half moon is, a half moon would look like a letter D. So again, it could be a symbol of the half moon. Now, why would it be a moon as opposed to a sun, given that, you know, again, Nika is tied to the sun? You would think that the moon god would kind of be the opposite of Nika. So I am kind of curious about that. You would expect them to be opposed, but that's, at the same time, I'm pretty sure the people of Wano are also represented by the moon in some way. Yeah, because if you actually look it up, Kozuki, the prominent family on Wano, what that literally means is like light and moon. So they're referring to basically the moonlight as like, I guess, a source, like a representation of like their faction and the people that they work with. So I guess that could explain why it differentiates the half moon and the moon, because the full moon could represent the Kozuki clan, because that, like I said, that refers to a literal like the moonlight. So I guess the half moon maybe represents the allies of the Kozuki clan. I don't know if everything would necessarily be based around Kozuki. It's kind of interesting. We'll also be looking into some alternate translations in just a minute to try and maybe clear up some of this ambiguity. But this is interesting that Half Moon and the Moon are apparently two different factions. But I do think this is lending credence to the idea that the D clan represents the Half Moon clan. And so we have essentially the people of Wano who did isolate themselves. So it would make sense that Wano is maybe not included in the D clan, at least not directly, because of that self-isolation, whereas everybody else became part of the Half Moon clan and thus became the quote-unquote D clan. So that maybe kind of comes together. And then, of course, at the end, I think this might be the most straightforward elements out of the whole batch. Man killed the sun and became God, and the sea god stormed, and they will never meet. So again, the they will never meet part is weird. Let's just ignore that for just a second. But man killed the sun and became God, and the sea god stormed. This is literally describing the current known history of One Piece. Man killed the sun. We know Joy Boy lost the Void Century War. So the sun god, was killed, and then the people who killed him became gods. So these people are presumably the celestial dragons, because they are the ones who are now literally, or rather effectively, the gods of the current world. They killed the sun and took their position at the top of the world and became gods. And then we also have this detail here, and the sea god storm. So I'll be honest, this is actually the line that made me start to think that the mention of all of these gods is not literal, because the other thing we now know about the Void Century is that the world flooded, right? So at some point through the use of the ancient weapons of Uranus, I believe. Well, I guess we don't technically know for sure, but whatever ancient, super powerful Mother Flame powered weapon, which again implies ancient technology, because that would be this whole nonsense. That weapon, every time it's fired, raises the sea levels of the entire planet. So, we know also that during the Void Century, sea levels rose by 200 meters, which is again an apocalyptic event. So I could easily see that being described as the sea god storming, because they literally are raising the sea levels by so much that it's just overflowing and taking over the entire earth, killing countless people. Like, that is something that could be described as the sea god stormed, to put it lightly. So I think that, again, we have to keep in mind, this is very mythological. We're working off of potentially like a game of telephone where this has been told and retold countless times. And this is also possibly based off like secondhand information. And not to mention, if you don't know about that powerful weapon, as far as everybody else in the world is concerned, the sea levels just rose randomly one day. Of course, they would deify that event as some kind of sea god raging against them. And especially now that we know the sun god was killed, I could easily see that series of events, like they killed the sun and the sea stormed in response. But in reality, they might have used that weapon that they use to kill Lelucia Kingdom on Nika, or on their forces at the very least, in order to effectively kill them, and then that directly resulted in the sea levels rising. So this is the main reason why I think all of these deities are not literal, because like we've been looking at the sun god, because we know the sun god is a devil fruit. We know it is a physical thing that people can in fact embody, and there might be other devil fruits that represent other things. I'm not saying that that's off the table, but what I'm saying is that these initial representations of these gods, the forest god, the original sun god, the earth god, I think that these are all representing events that occurred throughout history that were world-changing events. The sun god changed the world, but with the slave uprising that where they freed themselves from oppression. The earth god changed the world through the creation of the red line. The forest god changed the world through the creation of devil fruits, and the sea god changed the world through the insane flooding that occurred during the Void Century. These are all referring to events that occurred throughout history that now might be embodied by devil fruits, simply because of the way that devil fruits work, by embodying, humanity's dreams and all that jazz. But these original events are likely just that. They're just events. But I am now curious to see what these different gods will be embodied as devil fruits. Because obviously we've seen Nika, and I've got to assume that there's got to be an earth god, a forest god, and a sea god. I mean, maybe Green Bull is the forest god, because we know that we have the forest Logia, which in the original Japanese is apparently described as like the Logia, like it is the Logia of nature itself. So like it is in theory the most pure Logia that can exist. And so in that sense, that could be on some level the forest god fruit, and I could totally see Green Bull playing a bigger stage in the final arc of One Piece, especially since he kind of just got scared by Shanks and ran away, so he hasn't really done a whole lot. But yeah, so that could be that this could all be a very interesting sort of clue as to also who the big players in the final conflict will be. Because I'm willing to bet I could see Blackbeard embodying the sea god, because that feels like the kind of like darkness fruit that he could embody. and then some other faction. Maybe Emu could be the forest god, because we've seen Emu in like a garden whenever they're like on their own time, like off the clock. They're almost always in a garden hanging out with a bunch of plants and everything. Not to mention, we know that the Sunlight Tree Eve, which many people speculate could be the Devil Fruit Tree itself, also would go up through Mary Joie, which could also literally be going into Emu's office. So the forest god could be referring to either Emu or the sunlight tree that Emu directly has control over. So like that could represent that big player. And then I'm not sure who the earth god would be. Maybe some other factor that we haven't learned yet. Maybe, I mean, hell, Akainu, he literally is the embodiment of magma, which, as I was talking about earlier, could represent the creation of the red line and the source of all this energy and everything. He could very well be the quote unquote earth god at the end of the day. I mean, he's got the position for it. He's the head of the Marines. Which could easily splinter off from the world government and just be its own like wild card that factors into the final war. And his powers are technically Earth related. That like I said makes Emu the forest god. Blackbeard would eventually reveal that his like void fruit is the sea god, or he just gets a third fruit that is the sea god. And then of course we have Luffy as the sun god. So yeah, that could all piece together like who the major players are in the final arc. So that is a fun interpretation. But let's finally get to the third chapter of the story. The third world. Within the chaos there was emptiness. The inconvenient remnants recall the promised day and hear the voice of the half moon. Okay, so within the chaos there was emptiness. This probably is referring to the Void Century. I don't actually know if they said. I don't think they say when the book was written. But it would make sense to me if this was being written sort of at the end of the Void Century, and this could be referring to like them erasing like the start of the erase of the past. So like there's so much chaos, but now that they're losing this war and this book is being written, they're starting to erase the history, and that is why like within chaos there is emptiness. So like that could make some amount of sense maybe. The inconvenient remnants recall the promised day and hear the voice of the half moon. So again, another referring to the half moon here, which again, I think is referring to the D clan. And especially because the inconvenient remnants, if there's anything that you could use to describe the D clan, that's almost certainly what's referring to them. Because again, the D clan is almost certainly, we don't really know for sure, but it's almost certainly the not ancestors, the opposite of that, the people who descended from the original war against what would become the world government, passing down their legacy through this symbol of the half moon and awaiting the promised day, which seemingly is like because we've seen Roger knows he was too early. We know Shirahoshi is like arriving as the ancient weapon Poseidon to try and which lines up perfectly with like when Luffy's gonna get there, so we know it's like coming. Even Kozuki Odin mentioned like, oh, we know like in 20 years like shit's gonna get real, like for real. So there seems to be some prophetic element where they know that there is a day coming that will be the day like of reckoning, or where they hear the voice of the half moon. And then of course, in getting into the last of it, finally the sun god dances and laughs, guiding the world to its end. Then so this clearly referring to Luffy now embodying sun god Nika. So again, I think this part's pretty unambiguous. Guiding the world to its end. So they're trying to end the third world. This is kind of tying back into how back in Fishman Island. God, I'm referencing so many chapters here. In Fishman Island, we had the fortune teller whose name escapes me at the moment because my brain is going crazy right now. But the fortune teller, who was apparently always 100% accurate, predicted at the end of the arc that Luffy would in fact destroy Fishman Island. Um, so the implication that is sort of tying into that sort of ambiguity of like, how is this going to end? Because the prophecies are just saying like, oh, Luffy's going to destroy the world. But this could simply be referring to the end of the third world in the same way that the second world ended and the first world ended, so that we can then begin the fourth world, which will hopefully be a significant improvement over the last three. Because then the sun will return, bring a new morning, and they will surely meet. So, let's talk about the meeting. And I also want to start talking about the other sort of translations regarding this line in particular. So, if there's this one Reddit post here by Defus Doofus, so shout outs to them for coming up with this alternate translation, and I've seen a few other translations that seem to back this up. So let's go over it in order, and then we'll get back to the they will surely meet line at the end. So the earth god raged, and together with its serpent. This is implying. So the way they describe it is that the official translation is implying that the earth god used the serpent. But this seems to be saying that their interpretation is that it's more accurate to say that the earth god worked alongside the serpent, which that is curious, because it implies that the serpent of hellfire, which, like I said, I think represents the red line, is separate from the earth god. So maybe the earth god could be referring to, in its original incarnation, the original people who started the mine to harvest all of this energy from the earth, and then the red line could be the consequence of those actions that, maybe it was outside of their control. It could have been incidental. Hell, maybe the people that were rising up from enslavement, they could have created the red line, but again, either intentionally or accidentally. There's a lot of different ways I could see this going. Like the first world is definitely the most ambiguous in terms of, like, because it's so far in the past, we just have no point of reference for it really at this point. But it is interesting that the way they interpret it is that it's more that the earth god worked along with the serpent of hellfire. So I mean, take that as you will. I think it still means that the Serpent of Hellfire is referring to the red line, but by all means, the whole point of this video is to get people talking in the comments, so feel free to hit me with your own interpretations in the comments down below. Then, in regards to the whole devil fruit line, the forest god tamed the demons. This literally means made use of demons or dispatched demons to do something, but it gets kind of complicated because this symbol is more of an abstract general term to a broad range of malevolent supernatural entities. So again, this sort of implies that this could be referring to devil fruits, as they talk about later. It could be double meaning, sending out demon fruits around the world, since this kanji is apparently part of the same kanji that is used in devil fruits. So this is quite literally talking about this has to be talking about devil fruits. Like, if it's using the same kanji, like, I'll admit I don't know much about Japanese. I took 2 semesters in college. I barely passed and got my extra language credit, and kanji was always way above my head. But if they're using the exact same kanji symbol to describe both the demons in this statement as well as the devil fruits, then this has to refer to devil fruits. I don't really see any other way we could interpret that. But they're talking about, in terms of the taming, it's apparently more formal, and it's like using or employ demons. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, this could be maybe leading to a couple different interpretations, but at the end of the day, I think that it's quite clear that with the reference of the forest and the demons and it using the same kanji, that this, in general, in its most broadest interpretation, is just simply referring to the creation of devil fruits. Like I said, maybe the forest god is being represented by a specific entity or person or some sort of event that led to the creation of devil fruits. But the overall point that I think that we can take away from this until we get further information is that devil fruits were simply being created. But now we get to this one, and this is where I think my most I don't know if I've seen too many other people suggesting this particular theory based on this, but so in regards to the "and they will never meet again" text, the way he describes it, no, or she, I don't know who this person is. Never is a bit too strong of a word to use here. When a different phrase is closer to already not able to meet. So they can no longer meet. That is an interesting way of putting it. They can no longer meet, or they are no longer able to meet, is a more accurate phrasing. That is fascinating to me. Now, here's the thing. And they also talk about like this half moon thing. Let's just touch on this real quick, and then I'll dive back into this. So the half moon, same as in the second world part, but in Japanese, half moon people was used in the second, while in the third, literally voice of the fragmented moon, but more accurately as half moon missing its other half, as if incomplete, waiting for its missing piece. So this could be, in turn, the D-Clan. Maybe what the D-Clan is referring to is that they were originally a whole moon, but then they were fractured. So you kind of have a D, and then you have a backwards D. And then that could represent the two halves of the clan that need to reunite, and maybe that's what's referring to here. But if that was the case, again, this only happened in the second and the third world. Why would they be referring to the D-Clan and this whole moon situation in the first world when they don't even have that? But as per that alternate interpretation, they suggested that it could be referring to they are no longer able to meet. And if we pull up a couple of alternate interpretations here, let me just erase my lines. So there have been a lot of different fan translations. So I'm trying to like corroborate a bunch of different sources here. This is the TCB translation. They interpreted it as they would not meet again. They would not meet again, and then surely this time they will meet. That's one way of doing it. Another one is, again, they could not meet again, and then they could not meet again. He and they will surely meet again. So, and then, like I said, the translation here is they are no longer able to meet, which, again, I think that is closer to this they could not meet again sort of translation. And this is, I think, the most interesting translation that, like I said, this is corroborated with a couple of different sources now. So I'm going to go with this one because my theory, again, if this is in fact referring to the creation of the red line, then think about it. Now, who are the people being referred to in terms of like they're being unable to meet again? I'm not entirely sure, and I was racking my brain about this for a while, because, like, is it referring to the gods? Because, like, we mentioned in the first one, we have the sun god and the earth god, so are we saying that the sun god and the earth god would not be able to meet? And then in the second one, we're mentioning the forest god and the sea god, so maybe the forest and the sea can't meet? Is that what we're referring to here? I'm not sure. And then but then they just say they will surely meet again in the third one. But this one, I think, only refers to the sun god, and there's no other god. So I don't think it's referring to gods meeting. But hear me out. What if this is simply referring to the division of the world itself? Again, let's bring up the map of One Piece here. If my theory is correct, in the first world, the red line was created. And when the red line was created, they could not meet again, referring to the west and the east side of the globes. These entire hemispheres are now functionally cut off from one another, especially if they lost their ancient technology and no longer had access to like flying boats or whatever. This literally causes them to not be able to meet again. Then, when the second world ended and the sea gods stormed, and as I theorized, this could represent the flooding of the world, well, then that would lead to the creation of the Grand Line. And then now, the south and the north shall never meet again. So that once again they cannot, because you just cannot simply travel from one side of the Grand Line to the other, and you cannot travel from one side of the Red Line to the other. So this could be referring to the divisions being created in the world in order to split up the populace, to sort of divide and conquer and all that jazz. So this is my favorite interpretation of this line, because again, now in the third chapter we have, and they will surely meet. Now again, is this referring to multiple people? Is this referring to two people? It could be referring to more than two people, or rather two concepts. This could refer to the oceans of the world finally connecting through the destruction of the Red Line. Because one of the, I think, oldest long-running theories for One Piece is that the end of One Piece will feature the destruction of the Red Line, because that is, in theory, the only logical way to do things like create the All Blue. Because obviously, surely everybody is going to like accomplish their dreams by the end of the series, at least for all the Straw Hats. And Sanji's dream of finding the All Blue, well, I'm sorry, Sanji, but if you take a basic geography lesson, there's no physical place the All Blue could even be located. I guess maybe the start of the Grand Line? Or something like that could kind of be an All Blue? So, the only logical place for the story to really go from that point would be to sort of have the Red Line be destroyed, either at the point where Reverse Mountain was located, or more significantly, at the point where Mary Joie is located, on the opposite side of the Red Line from Reverse Mountain, which is the other point where all four seas converge. And that seems like the most logical place to me to destroy the Red Line, where the capital of this oppressive government resides, and thus create the All Blue. And then that would cause all of the seas to surely finally meet again. So that is, I think this all ties back into that theory with this interpretation, with this they could not meet, rather, and like I think they will never meet, I think is a fair translation, because when we view it in this context, from the perspective of the people of that world, an entire hemisphere just got cut off from you, and it's completely an insurmountable obstacle to even conceive of trying to like climb over that wall or to cross the Grand Line in order to actually like access the other side of the world. It's not physically impossible. Like, we know Sanji's family did it. Obviously the Marines have sea stone coated ships that are able to cross across the calm belts and everything. So like it's not like impossible, but for the average person, crossing the world like that is functionally impossible. So the idea that, again, from the perspective of the person writing these myths, like, yeah, of course they would never be able to meet. Like they'll never meet again. Like, the world is destroyed functionally. Like, you've ruined geography as a concept. So yeah, like, I think that ties everything back together in a really neat way that I think works really well. And now that we've finally made our way through all of this text, what, like an hour into this analysis, Jesus, let's actually talk about the mural more directly. I've already gone over a lot of the elements, so like I said, I think that this whole sort of sequence with the conveyor belt is clearly talking about the first world. So we have a lot of powerful technology. We have the slaves being forced to go into the center of the earth to recover energy. They're depositing it on these boats, which, like I said, for all we know, maybe that's referring to spaceships, ferrying it off to an interstellar civilization. Interestingly enough, we have another boat down here, sort of in the bowels of the city, and I'm honestly not even sure what to make of that. It could just simply be representing this idea that, like, all vehicles that they know of are basically ships. So, like, maybe it's they're thinking of just like a car that goes around the city or something, or maybe it's some sort of vehicle that helps ferry people around to their jobs, or to help maintain the city. Like, I'm not sure what to interpret here. Like, why this one random boat in particular is there. However, another thing that we have that's interesting down here is the spaceship, which is again, this is kind of like a classic doodle of a spaceship that maybe they don't even know what it is, but the fact that it's also seemingly buried under the city lends credence to this idea that like the celestial dragons descended from, like, maybe they crash landed on the planet and their ship was embedded in the earth, and then this ship just kind of became the foundation of their city, literally being built on the ruins of their wreckage with whatever technology they could harvest. So like there's some interesting implications from just these small little doodles. Then I think that we should finally talk about the three gigantic shadowy elephants in the room, which are this huge serpent, this huge bird, and this whatever the hell it is over here. Now, these are the three most prominent figures in the entire mural, and the number 3 gets brought up a lot, but the most obvious connection, I think, would be to connect this to the ancient weapons. But I'm not sure if that really works necessarily, because like you can kind of start to piece it together. Like, okay, so we have the serpent. This could represent the sea kings that are in control of Poseidon, and then we have this sort of bird creature which could represent Uranus, who would be the thing that can rain down death from the sky that the world government is using to destroy entire islands and whatnot and raise the sea levels. So that could maybe make sense. And it is interesting that they are specifically clashing with one another. Like, they are clearly in conflict. So these ancient weapons are not on the same side. And although it is interesting that they're both spewing fire, because as far as we know, only the flying one can spew fire, because that's presumably how they killed Lelucia. Like, this could be representing the flying one's fire. So why is it that the sea serpent, the sea king, is able to breathe fire? Because I don't think we have seen sea kings breathing fire before. But then, of course, we also have this whole elephant in the room, because, like, the last one would be Pluton. And I don't know about you, but this doesn't look like a battleship to me. And, like, Pluton is the one thing we have the most information about, because we know that it is a ship, and we know that it has normal deck plans that Franky has read. So, like, if Pluton was some kind of giant humanoid thing, you would think Franky would have maybe pointed that out. Now, to be fair, counterpoint, what if the fact that maybe Pluton is this giant humanoid thing, and it's actually a giant robot, and that could be what inspired some of Franky's inventions, such as his upgrade to his own body, as well as the Franky General samurai mech thing that he created. Maybe that is based off of some of the ideas he saw from the Pluton blueprints, and that's why he's been building things in that direction, to try and build these sort of like big bipedal mechs based off of this sort of mecha Pluton. So, but like, that feels like kind of a wild theory to me, and that feels like a prerequisite to believe in if you were to buy that these three things represent the ancient weapons. And I'm just not sure that that's the case, because like, this is representing clearly the opposition to Joy Boy. So like, if anything, this would presumably represent Emu. So like, maybe this is representing the different forms, because we've seen the Gorosei that work under Emu directly seemingly taking on these gigantic demonic forms that might not even be related to devil fruits for all we know. And so this could easily represent that. But then we still have this weird opposition between the sea serpent and the bird. So like, are there perhaps more people that have these gigantic demonic shape-shifting abilities, and they got into conflicts? We know one of the Gorosei is this gigantic sandworm, which would, I guess, fit this sort of, so like, maybe it's a sandworm and not a sea king. But again, why are they in conflict with each other? Now again, maybe there's just people on different sides, but there's some element of the puzzle that just isn't quite piecing together for me. And not to mention, I mean, the Sea King also is very different from the other two, because the other two are very solid black. Like, there's no real detail on them. They're just silhouettes that are completely shaded in black. But the Sea King, or the Serpent, or whatever this thing is, there's all kinds of... There's this weird, like, tire track pattern. We've got, like, these X's on it. Which to me, and the fact that it's also rising out of the city, that makes me think that the Sea King here thing is a completely artificial creation. Which maybe the Pluton is this instead, and we're misled as to what the ancient weapons are. But then that would make Poseidon the weird giant figure, which again, that doesn't really make any sense. So like, I don't think these can be the ancient weapons. Um, but maybe this is the serpent of hellfire that was mentioned in the first verse, because again, we have the earth god raging, and with its serpent of hellfire, so like the earth god clearly opposing the sun god, which is the person who or concept that liberated the enslaved people. So the earth god represents the city, and with the serpent of hellfire that it works with, so this could represent simply two entities of the first world working together in order to try and defeat the slave uprising, which that implies then that the bird actually represents the slaves in some way. I'm not entirely sure how that works out, because this is what is in opposition to the serpent, but I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense. It could be just simply like, is this proto Nika? Is this maybe somebody who owned the phoenix fruit? Like there's so many. I'm not sure how else to interpret that. Excuse me, I just bumped my microphone. Apologize to headphone users there. But so other than that though, we have other details, because here we need to move on to some other topics. So here we have two boats that are very familiar, if you've read through the story, because here is clearly the Ark Maxim. That is Enel's ship from Skypiea. And it's very clearly identifiable as the Ark Maxim, because it is shooting out lightning, which was Enel's devil fruit. So I don't know if the Ark Maxim existed since the first world. I think that Enel constructed the Ark Maxim. I'd have to go back and check myself to be sure, but from what I'm aware of, he constructed it, and it could have been simply based off of some ancient plans he found. So maybe the Ark Maxim existed in the first world, powered by electricity, and now that he has the electricity fruit, he was simply able to recreate it and power it with himself. Now, what exactly is the point of this? Well, we know that the Ark Maxim is actually capable of flying between planets, because in Enel's cover story, he does fly up to the moon. And if you're an anime-only watcher and you don't know about this, it's probably blowing your mind. I highly recommend looking up the cover stories of One Piece, because they can be shockingly relevant to the plot, and one of them literally involves Enel flying to the moon after Skypiea and going on a whole bunch of adventures up there. So maybe this could simply represent the spaceships that we were talking about earlier, but in a much more literal sense, with it actually being able to fly into space. And then we have the Noah, which is also shaded in this sort of like underwater area, and it's also very clearly identifiable by the fact that it is surrounded by animals going 2 by 2 into the Noah. So I think that it is pretty clear that there's no other way you could possibly interpret this as being the Noah. Like, this has to be the Noah. So, some other curious elements here is that we have this angelic figure, which, obviously, like, angelic being related to the Noah makes sense, but we also have the Skypian people, the various winged folk, that this could be related to. So, like, I'm curious if the Noah was actually constructed by Skypians somehow, and maybe it descended from the heavens, or it was designed to ferry people from the bottom of the ocean to the heavens, or something of that sort. There's so many different ways you could interpret this, and I'm not sure what the full significance of the angel is. Although, again, maybe this could tie back into the thing I was mentioning at the very start, where we have these weird halos on top of everybody. I don't know if these are necessarily related, but the fact that we have the halos disappearing, and then we have this angel who very specifically does not have a halo, curiously enough. So, again, that could just mean it's a Skypian. It could mean it's an angel that has had its halo stripped from it in order to power the ancient civilization. There's Again, I really want to see what you guys say in the comments in order to sort of help me piece this together. Yeah, excuse me. But yeah, and then curiously enough, we still have this third ship, which this ship is drawn quite possibly the most curiously out of all of them. So we have this dark figure with crowns. If anything would represent Emu, this feels like it represents Emu. But curiously, so like I said, it's the Noah is surrounded by this sort of dark background, which implies it's underwater, but then that dark background sort of seamlessly transitions into the ship that this figure, which I will just call Emu for shorthand, is seemingly standing in, and it's being struck by lightning. So it implies these three forces are somehow working in combination with each other. So like, it actually, if anything's the ancient weapons, maybe this is referring to the ancient weapons. Like, this could be referring to Poseidon with Shirahoshi guiding the sea serpents. This could be referring to Uranus with it being able to travel to space and being powered by lightning. It could have powerful lightning cannons that we have like Enel using and whatnot. And then we have Emu on a ship made of water. So maybe Emu could represent the sea god in this interpretation. And they could literally have the power of the ocean on their side, which maybe that's why they constructed a weapon that purposefully floods the world so methodically, is that they have power over the ocean. So the more ocean there is, the more powerful they're able to become. So this could be hinting that Emu could be the ocean god, which to be fair, if you reverse the letters in Emu, you get Umi, which apparently in Japanese means sea or ocean. So that could be referring to that theory as well. So maybe the forest god isn't Emu and it's actually the sea god that is Emu, and like I said, the forest god could be something else. So yeah, like that the fact that their boat is made out of what is clearly meant to be water based off of how it transitions from the Noah, that could be alluding to that. Although that would imply that maybe one of the ancient weapons is like this sort of weird water boat thing, if the Noah and the Arc Maxim is meant to be referring to other ancient weapons. That would mean Pluton is some kind of like water battleship. Maybe it's a submarine like Law's ship or something of that sort. There's a number of different ways I could see it going. But that I think mostly covers the right side. The only other things of note that I can think of, because God knows we've been talking for long enough. But we have more of these energy symbols, because so like these symbols clearly represent the units of energy that are being pulled out of the earth by the slaves, and yet we see more of them in the sky next to the moon, which I'm curious about. So like that could represent that maybe this isn't the only way to get energy, but it's simply the most efficient way, because like there is energy elsewhere in the world or in the universe, but this method of slavery clearly generates far more energy than anything that they've ever used before. So maybe that's why they're going for this slavery route instead of harvesting any other source of energy, because again, mankind succumbed to greed, so they were focusing more on the biggest source of energy instead of all these other smaller sources of energy. But then now we have on the left side of the mural, we have more units of these energy floating around just in random locations. We have some next to some of the boats. We have some next to the big bad. I'm not sure what these are referring to necessarily. Maybe it's the remnants of the energy. Again, if this energy actually is related to Haki, maybe that could represent how people are using Haki today for combat. And so like we have the bad guys surrounded by Haki, we have the good guys with Haki at their back. And like the Haki could be literally like the leftover lingering energy from this whole gigantic mining operation of the first world. But now let's just break down this fight scene, and then I think that'll finally wrap things up for us, because I think that this will be one of the more straightforward parts of it, because clearly what I think that this entire scene is representing is basically just Joy Boy's army and like all of the different people of the world that he collected in order to fight on his side. Because right here, obviously we have Nika first and foremost. That one's probably the least ambiguous of them all. Then we have a dark angelic figure with a flame behind them. I think that based on the description, we know Lunarians are dark-skinned with black wings, and they have flames that they naturally generate with their body. Very clearly a Lunarian. We also have this sort of robotic-looking fellow with a jetpack that clearly looks like Emmett. So it could represent robots in general, because a lot of these are probably representing entire groups of people. But we do know that Joy Boy in particular had a known ally that was a giant robot, and the robot is also significantly larger than Joy Boy, so that kind of fits sidewise or size-wise and how they're depicted. So that this all I think makes sense with this just being Emmett themselves. Now up here, curiously enough, we have some sort of like animal person. They almost look like a horse of some kind. They have a snout, ears, and then a mane and a tail, and they're wielding a sword. So this presumably is referring to like the mink tribes, and this could be simply referring to like a horse mink, or something of that sort. And it makes sense. I think the minks would be allied with Joy Boy, no question. Now here, interestingly enough, we have two people standing on a whale while it's raining. Now, I'm not sure about the rain element of it. That feels important. Why? I mean, I don't think anything in here is included by accident. Um, but the whale, I have a feeling this is referring to the island whales, aka the type of whale that Laboon is, that are so gigantic that people could just live inside of them. In fact, I think Crocus or maybe somebody else mentions that like there would be entire groups of people that would live inside these whales in the past. I think that this could be what that is representing, is that these are people who like they're shown here riding the whale, but they could have more literally been inside of the whale, like living inside of it, almost piloting it like a living ship of some kind. So I think that that's what that's meant to represent. I'm not sure about the rain here. It could be simply representing the whale's spout and how it like would make it seem like it's raining due to how much water that they can put out. It could be referring to like another god, like the sea god storming or something like that. I'm not sure. Maybe the dark figure is causing the rain because like they've got their arm all raised up, and then all of a sudden the rain is coming down right next to it. So like that could be trying to tie a connection there, and that it is Emu or this figure, which probably is a representation of Emu, or at least the terror that Emu was able to convey through their power, causing it to rain, which in turn ties into the idea that the world was flooding that I mentioned earlier. But going back to identifying things, we have this gigantic figure here, who is very clearly, in my opinion, an ancient giant, like Ors. In fact, this could even literally be Ors for all we know. Because we know ancient giants have horns. That we've seen them with a variety of colored skin, because Ors had red skin and Ors Jr. had green skin. So like ancient giants clearly can have a variety of skin tones. So this is clearly like a darker skinned or more colorfully skinned giant, or ancient giant, I should say. And he's also like the biggest of the group by far. Like he dwarfs even Emmett, who was already pretty gigantic. So I think this is clearly meant to represent the ancient giants of Elbaf. Then we have here, who is clearly a mermaid wielding a trident. So this is almost certainly representing the mermaid queen with the long hair, as well as the sort of ambiguous sort of chest bandage here. So this is probably meant to be the Shirahoshi of the Void Century, the one who could command Sea Kings. And that might explain why there's a fish next to them. I think that this maybe is representing Poseidon as a whole, with the Mermaid Queen commanding fish to fight alongside her. That, like, again, that sounds like the kind of thing where, like, if you hear it secondhand, this is how they would interpret it, even though it will obviously be a lot more epic. We have a tiny figure here, which I think is clearly the Tontata. They have a giant poofy tail, which is exactly how the Tontata tend to look. Over here, we have what appears to be another mink. This time, like, instead of a horse, it's like a, I don't know, more traditional, like, fox or like smaller mammal, like mink of some variety. I'm not sure. I'm curious as to why there is two though. Like, surely one would represent the minks as a whole. So does this mean that there were two different mink factions, and then maybe they united on Zunisha before, by the end of the Void Century? And or maybe, like, I'm not sure why there'd be two. I mean, I guess we have seen a number of like animal-esque people in general, but we've always we've always speculated that probably just means that they are like part mink, like maybe they're half mink, and then that's why they look like they have animal characteristics but are otherwise human. So like maybe that's what this is representing or something. Because like this one feels a lot more animalistic than the other one. This also could be referring to the Sulong forms of the minks, because this one is like bigger, has more fur, a more fluffy tail, and more defined features. So like maybe this is a Sulong mink, and this is just a normal mink. And for some reason they're depicted differently. I'm not sure why, but that could be it. Then we have what appears to be a much more normal giant. Excuse me. And then my pen stopped working. Oh, give me a second. Technical difficulties. Oh god. Load the lag. Come on. Where's my? Okay. Sorry, everything started lagging there for a second. My bad. Sorry, you had to see that. Yeah, this is probably not going to get edited. Sorry about that. But yeah, so well, I think that this figure here is clearly a much more traditional, modern day Elbaf giant, or at least like this is more the ancient giants with the more varied skin tones and the horns that are natural, and then this one, the horns are coming out of the back of what is much more clearly a helmet. So I think that this simply represents the more traditional modern giants. Like, they're still huge, they're still bigger than basically everything else aside from the ancient giants, but we know the ancient giants are even bigger than normal modern giants. So I think that checks out. Although, alternatively, this could maybe represent the Buccaneer race, which are kind of an in-between step between human-sized creatures and giants. So maybe this could be representing a Buccaneer of some kind. But it could easily go either way. As I mentioned before, I'm almost certain that this is representative of the Celestial Dragons, or at least the ancestors of the Celestial Dragons, as they descended from the heavens on some kind of spaceship of some variety. Then we have down here. Let's go with over here, because these are the more unique ones. So as I mentioned earlier, this looks like a Wano boat. We've got a guy with a katana. We have a top knot. We've got seemingly another top knot in the back, and we have a shuriken. I think that this is clearly meant to be Wano. So that checks out. And then here we have it's interesting because this almost looked like a I think it's a caravel, those kinds of ships that have like the bows that hang off the side of it or whatever. But again, I think that all the ships are depicted as being basically identical in structure for a reason. I think that this is meant to be depicting 3 ships, or rather more generally just a lot of ships working together. And the symbol being represented here is the symbol of Joy Boy, or rather the symbol of Nika. As you can see, it matches the shield between the two. And we have seen a number of civilizations like Alabasta and a lot of other places that have used a very similar symbol to this throughout the world. So I think that this could simply be representing the variety of different like human tribes that all like followed Nika into battle. So like like Alabasta ships and like other various common human ships just all together in a big fleet following Nika. So that makes sense. And then of course down here, these 3 over here, I am the least sure about what they're meant to represent. Like, maybe it's representing like the long arm tribe, because like this guy has like weird long arms coming out of him or something. I'm not sure. It almost looks like he's got a sash, because like we see the with Nika, you can see the sort of like cloud sash that he has for being awakened as a Zoan user. And it almost looks like this random guy on this random boat down here has a similar sash, so it could be another awakened Zoan user. But that feels like such a weird detail to include. So I'm wondering if maybe instead it's meant to be more like I said, like a long arm tribe, or it's kind of this is another one I would definitely like to see more people's opinions on as to what exactly this figure is meant to be. Same with this figure. I mean, he looks like he's got like a fishing rod or something. Like, I don't know about that. And again, this guy, they feel somewhat distinct because like they've got this custom little hairdo. They're carrying some kind of long polearm style weapon or tool. They've got a bigger boat because they've got two sails. In fact, I think that's the only boat on this whole thing that has like two sails sacked up. But again, I'm not sure what they are. It's such a strange design. But then, I quite possibly my most off the wall theory is regarding this ship, right? So if we look at this ship, out of all of the other ships in the entire scene, this is the only ship that is shaded in completely black. The closest we get is the Wano ship, which is shaded darkly, but not nearly as dark as this ship. Now, here's my crazy off the wall theory regarding this ship. What if this ship is the ship of the man that is marked by flames? We don't know much about the man marked by flames, but what we do know is that he sails around in an all-black ship and that he seemingly has the power to create whirlpools that just destroy all other ships around them. So, what if... Now, I'm not saying that the man marked by flames is being depicted in this mural, but it's possible that the ship that the man marked by flames is operating off of could be an ancient vessel from the Void Century. And I mean, like, hey, he's clearly influential. He knows about the importance of the poneglyphs because he's the one person in possession of the final road poneglyph that will lead to Laugh-Tale, and is seemingly the only poneglyph that like no other person in the world has ever like seen or interacted with in the last 20 years. So, in if that is in fact the case, then it would make sense to me that this person would also be able to source or gain access to a ship from the Void Century, and that could possibly represent some kind of incredibly powerful technology that they also have access to if they really are piloting this ancient ship. I mean, hell, maybe we could be wrong about the idea that the whirlpools are the result of a devil fruit, because it could turn out that he is in fact piloting an ancient technology vessel, and maybe part of that ancient technology is the ability to create all of those whirlpools that are able to drown the world and everything. So that is an interesting possibility, I think. But I'll admit that I probably have the least basis of justification for that theory, since I am basing all of that literally off of just the fact that this one boat is shaded slightly darker than all the other boats. Now, like I said, I don't know if anything in this mural is done by accident. Maybe they just wanted to break up the flow of the ships and shaded this one darker to try and make it stand out from the others. I don't know. Maybe that's all there is to it. But if we're going to read into every single random little detail on this mural, I think that it's a possibility that this ship could maybe be hinting towards something related to the man marked by flames. And not to mention, it is the closest to the flames at the bottom of the mural, so like maybe it's related. But yeah, I think that I have officially gone insane. I have been staring at this mural for way too long. I've been I think my brain is melting. I think I've been talking for like over 90 minutes. So I think I'm going to finally... I think I've talked about everything that I could possibly think of in regards to this mural. I'm going to call it there for today. I wanted that for anybody who managed to stick with me through this entire chaotic, rambling nonsense. Thank you very much for watching and putting up with my nonsense. By all means, as always, I'm happy, I'm eager to continue the conversation in the comments down below. I desperately want to see more speculation and theories about what is going on in this mural. It's so interesting to talk about, and I want to see your craziest, most off-the-wall theories that you can come up with. And until next time, like I said, like and subscribe if you enjoyed whatever the hell this was. I'll get back to making gaming content after this, I swear. And thank you all for watching. And I guess I hope to see you all in the next one. Oh boy. Can't wait for the next chapter.